There is a truth everyone who has walked through a toxic relationship must eventually face. The only person who can stay beside a narcissist is not the strongest one, but the one who has been wounded deeply enough to mistake pain for familiarity. The closeness of a narcissist doesn't pull you in through love, but through emotional memory, memories you no longer remember with your mind, yet your body remembers with absolute clarity. Jung said that we are drawn toward what has not yet been healed. Therefore, when a narcissist appears with intense eyes, overwhelming attention, and the way they seem to see through you within minutes, you think you have met destiny. But in truth, you are meeting something very old, the pattern your childhood once lived in. There, you had to read other people's emotions to feel safe. You had to stay silent to keep the peace. You had to become strong when you were still just a child. And so when you meet a narcissist, your nervous system doesn't sound the alarm. It exhales and says, I know how to survive this kind of love. And that's when you confuse the collapse inside you for connection. This is not your weakness. It is the survival pattern you once needed to grow up. But then, at some point, usually when you have no energy left to give you, confront the most frightening realization. You didn't stay because you loved them. You stayed because the wound inside you was familiar with the feeling of having to prove your worth. And in that moment of recognition, the darkness loosens its grip on you just a little. Because real strength is not enduring chaos. It is daring to ask a question you have never asked yourself before. Why does this pain feel familiar to me? And from that question, the journey back to yourself finally begins. Part 1. The first misunderstanding. Why the narcissist doesn't choose randomly. When a narcissist enters your life, the first thing that pulls you toward them is not the charm or power they display, but the deep familiarity they awaken inside you, a familiarity you mistake for destiny, when in truth it is the echo of old wounds. Jung once said that the people who appear in our lives are not accidental. They are mirrors of the parts of our unconscious we have never dared to face. And with a narcissist, that encounter is not the union of two souls, but the collision between a void that needs to be filled and a nervous system trained for chaos long ago. Think about it. They are not drawn to people with firm boundaries, not moved by souls who know how to protect themselves, not interested in those who embody the quiet stability of an inner world at peace. They seek those who feel more than they see, those whose sensitivity allows them to sense another's pain faster than they sense their own. They need people who forgive easily, soften quickly, self-blame instinctively, bend to avoid conflict, people who can tolerate their unpredictability without running away. And above all, they are attracted to those who carry a very specific kind of silence. The silence of children who grew up in homes where peace existed only when they held their breath, watched carefully, and adapted. What's frightening is that you don't recognize this immediately, because a narcissist doesn't enter your life in the shape of darkness. They arrive as light, warm, empathetic, sweet, as if they see right through you and accept you unconditionally. They ask the exact questions you need to hear, listen to the pain you hide, touch the emotional deprivation you thought no one ever understood. You weren't mesmerized by them, you were mesmerized by the version of yourself they reflected back to you, a version that finally feels seen. But this is not true seeing. It is the technique of idealized mirroring. They build an image of you based on everything you longed for, but never received. Most people who stay long with a narcissist say the same thing. I've never connected with anyone that fast and that deeply. But that isn't soul connection. It's wound connection. They do not see who you are. They see the empty spaces in you, emotional hunger, insecurity, the need to be chosen, needed, loved without being abandoned. And they fill those spaces with promises, with intensive attention, with a perfect replica of the love you've always lacked. What pulls you toward them is not their strength, but your survival history. People who get trapped in the narcissistic cycle often share a common trait. They had to grow up too soon. They were the children who monitored every emotional shift in the household to maintain peace. They were the ones carrying emotional responsibility for adults who couldn't regulate themselves. They learned to sacrifice themselves to be loved, to endure, to be accepted. For you, endurance is not unusual. It is the first language of love you were ever taught. The narcissist senses this the way a predator senses blood, not to protect you, but to test how much you can tolerate. And you can tolerate a lot. You tolerate so much that they believe you will never leave. You tolerate so much that they think you were born to be the mirror reflecting their grandiosity. You tolerate so much that you forget love is not an endurance test. And from this truth, we see the deepest point of part one. The only person who can remain beside a narcissist is not the strong one, but the one familiar with survival, the one who learned silence to keep peace, the one who's trained to be loved, the one whose heart was so wide they didn't realize it was being used. They believed they were loving, but in reality they were repeating an old story that was never healed in childhood. And that is the tragedy, a tragic beauty in Jung's cruel way, because within that tragedy lies the doorway to awakening. You thought you were drawn to them because your heart recognized the right person. But the truth is, your heart recognized a familiar setting. And in the moment you see that, the story begins to change. You are no longer prey. You become the observer. You begin breaking the cycle you once believed was destiny. Part two. The mechanism of dark attraction. Why you don't leave even when you know they are toxic. The most puzzling part of a relationship with a narcissist is not why you love them, but why you cannot leave even when you clearly see what is happening. You see the manipulation. You feel the coldness. You know they do not love you the way you love them. And yet, you stay. Not because you are weak, not because you are naive, but because a part of you, the part Jung called the unseen shadow, is being awakened. The power of a narcissist doesn't lie in who they are. It lies in how perfectly they lock into your wound. They do not seduce your heart. They activate your nervous system precisely in the way unsafe relationships once did. And when your body hears that familiar rhythm, sweetness, silence, pull, push, it doesn't sound the alarm. It recognizes home. The home of a child who learned to navigate emotional storms, who tried to guess whether tomorrow would be sun or rain, who clung to rare moments of warmth as if they were the last source of life. That is why you stay. You are trying to finish an old story. You do not love them. You are loving the version of yourself who once longed to be completed, a version that never got what it needed. The narcissist does not bring you new love. They recreate the love you never fully received. And that is what confuses you. If I just try a little harder this time, maybe the story will turn out differently. But your effort is not love. It is the child in you trying to rewrite the chapter your parents never wrote correctly. Jung called this the compulsion to repeat, the urge to reenact what was never healed. You are not addicted to the narcissist. You are addicted to hope. Hope that this time pain will finally have meaning. Hope that this time, if you are patient enough, they will love you. The part three, the awakening point. When you realize the one falling apart isn't them, it's you. There is a moment in a relationship with a narcissist that everyone who has lived through it remembers very clearly, not because it is loud or dramatic, but because it happens so quietly, you almost don't notice you've crossed into a different stage. It is the moment you look back at yourself, not through their words, not through how they treat you, but through the heaviness sitting inside your own body, and you suddenly understand that you are no longer the person who first walked into this relationship. You are not as bright as before, not as confident, not as natural, not the person who used to laugh from the heart. You see in your own eyes an ancient exhaustion, as if you have lived too many years in tension that no one but you has ever truly known. Jung once said that awakening does not come when we see the light, but when we can no longer ignore the darkness. And that is exactly what happens. You do not awaken because they did something new that hurt you more. You awaken because you cannot keep accepting the feeling of losing yourself for even one more day. What wakes you up is not the betrayal, not the lies, not even the cruelty. What wakes you up is exhaustion. It is the day you realize you are no longer afraid of losing them. The thing you fear now is continuing to live like this. You fear waking up every morning having to play a version of yourself you never wanted to become. You fear having to guess whether they will be kind or cold, loving or cruel, gentle or punishingly silent. And what you fear most is the fact that you have grown so used to all of this that you no longer know what peace feels like. Then at some point, in the middle of all that chaos, your mind becomes crystal clear. Not because they changed, not because you heard some advice or read a profound quote, but because your soul, the part Jung called the self, begins to step forward after years of being pushed down. It does not scream. It does not rage. It simply says one very quiet, very simple sentence. I cannot live like this anymore. And that single sentence, small but decisive, cracks the entire loop. From that moment on, you start to see everything through different eyes. You see the manipulation you used to call love. You see the coldness you used to excuse as they're just stressed. You see the apologies you once believed were sincere but now recognize as tools to keep you under control. You see the sweet moments you once considered rare and precious, now revealed as carefully timed rewards to keep you stuck. And the most painful, but also the most liberating realization is this. You did not stay because you loved them. You stayed because you didn't know how to love yourself. This awakening doesn't make you leave immediately, but it changes everything at the root. Because once you see who you have become by staying with them, you can no longer pretend everything is fine. You cannot return to that old blindness. You cannot keep believing a story your heart can no longer swallow. And even if you haven't physically left the relationship yet, your heart has already begun to pull back. Your energy is no longer wide open to them as before. Emotional dependence starts to crack. The trauma bond begins to lose its grip. That moment, silent, unseen by anyone else, is the turning point of the entire journey. Because you don't need a huge explosion to change your life. You only need enough honesty to admit one thing. I don't recognize myself anymore. From there, the entire universe within you starts to move. And that is the first sign of your return to yourself. Part 4. The internal revolt. The revolt inside you does not begin with shouting or fiery arguments. It begins with a very small, very thin silence, so subtle that if you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't recognize it as the moment your soul wakes up after far too long enduring. You don't make any big declarations. You simply stop doing the things that had become habits. You stop texting first, stop anxiously waiting for their replies, stop exhausting yourself trying to explain every time they twist the story, stop trying to read their moods, stop asking yourself what you did wrong. This is when you unconsciously pull your energy back, and for a narcissist, that is the most dangerous signal. The frightening thing about narcissists is that they don't need you to say anything to know you're changing. They read your energy with a sharpness 10 times that of an ordinary person. When you pull your energy inward, even in silence, they feel it clearly, and that is when their panic begins. In that panic, they never choose silence or honesty. They choose tactics. The first tactic they play is becoming strangely perfect. They turn back into the exact version of themselves that once made you fall for them. Gentle, attentive, proactive, caring, listening. They text more, ask more questions, try to act like they understand you better than anyone. And do you know what's most surprising now? You see all of it, but you no longer believe it. You no longer feel moved when they act unusually kind. You no longer feel saved. A part of you steps back, observes, and that part is the clearest proof that your soul has awakened. When intentional sweetness fails to pull you back as before, they begin attacking your memories, something narcissists are masterful at using as a subtle weapon. They remind you of a beautiful night you shared, of a hug that once made you feel cherished, of a promise you believed with all your heart at the time. Narcissists are very skilled at activating the exact fragments of memory that make you soften, because memories in a narcissistic relationship are always a blend of real love and deep manipulation. But this time, when they bring up the past, you no longer feel that familiar lump in your throat. You feel something else, clarity. You still remember, but you are no longer trapped there. You see it the way you'd see a faded painting, beautiful, but no longer able to fool you. When memory doesn't work, they switch to making themselves the victim. This is the role they play so well. It once made you blame yourself, but now it no longer has the same effect. They say they feel abandoned, that you are becoming distant, that you are cold, that you have changed. They say they are just trying to love you the only way they know how. And they say it with a sadness that once would have sent you rushing to comfort them. But now you remain still, not because you are heartless, but because you finally see what you never dared to admit. They are not hurting because you're leaving, they are hurting because they are losing control. When the victim act fails, they pull out their strongest weapon, making you feel guilty. You've disappointed me. You don't love me like you used to. You're destroying this relationship. After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me? These lines used to be chains, locking you into guilt, driving you to your knees, apologizing, even when you had done nothing wrong. But now, when they say these things, instead of piercing your heart, the words fall away like dull arrows. You hear them, but you are not pulled in. You feel them, but you are not manipulated. Because you finally understand that the guilt does not belong to you. It is an old program from childhood, from when you carried the emotional responsibility for others just to feel safe. And this is the moment you begin stepping out of that script. But when all the soft tactics fail, the narcissist's real nature surfaces. Anger, nagging, attacks. They insult you, blame you, belittle you, devalue you, bring up your smallest mistakes to make you feel like a burden. But this time, you don't crumble. You don't cry. You don't apologize. You also don't retaliate. You simply recognize one painful but liberating truth. They never truly loved you. They only loved the feeling of owning you. That rage does not show that they're heartbroken over losing you. It shows that they're enraged over losing a mirror that once reflected their idealized image. When anger fails, they launch their final move, the one that appears only when they know you are about to escape their control. The special Hoover. Promises to change. Late confessions of love. Deep, elaborate apologies. Or, more dramatically, they fabricate a crisis, illness, accidents, loss, anything that can pull your compassion back in. This is the moment many people turn back, but you don't. Because somehow your soul has become clear enough that you see the staging behind it all. You no longer confuse compassion with obligation. You no longer mistake pity for love. And most importantly, you no longer mistake pain for destiny. Throughout this whole time, what is happening inside you is not some grand cinematic transformation. It is a return to yourself after years of being pulled away from who you really are. You do not become hardened. You become honest. You do not lose your gentleness. You simply stop giving it to someone who uses it to hurt you. You do not become numb. You simply refuse to be a mirror for an empty ego any longer. Your revolt is not against them. It is against the version of yourself who once believed love meant endurance. It is a revolt against old fears, the fear of abandonment, the fear of not being enough, the fear of losing a connection you once believed was the only one you'd ever have. When you look those fears straight in the eye, they lose their power. And when they lose their power, the narcissist has nothing left to manipulate. What they lose is not someone who loved them. What they lose is someone who once believed they had to sacrifice themselves to be loved. And when that person you no longer exists in that old version, all of their strategies collapse. Not because you are stronger than them, but because you have found yourself again. And once someone has found themselves, no narcissist can hold on to them. Part 5. The quiet withdrawal. When you leave in silence and the narcissist's world collapses. The phase of quiet withdrawal is not the moment you slam the door and declare you're done. It is the point where even you don't fully understand why you no longer want to fight, no longer want to explain, no longer want to preserve this relationship, even though before you clung to it to the point of agony. What changes is not your outer behavior, but the deepest energetic layer inside you, where your soul whispers a truth you once tried to avoid. There is nothing left in me to give here. And when that awareness rises, it feels like a door opening slightly inside you. You don't announce your departure. You don't demand that they change. You don't try to prove who's right or wrong. You simply become silent. And it is that silence, not tears or arguments, that is the first thing to shatter the narcissist's power. Your silence is not passivity. It is the nervous system of someone who has been wounded too much, finally stopping and realizing that continuing to react is self-destruction. It is not indifference, it is awakening. Jung once said that people only begin to heal when they stop running away from the truth. Your silence is precisely that moment. The moment you face the truth, you once feared that this relationship cannot be saved by your love. For the narcissist, your silence is not normal. It is the strongest threat you have ever unconsciously sent them. Because silence means you are no longer reacting. No reaction means you have stopped supplying energy. And stopping the supply of energy means they are gradually losing their life source. You used to be the mirror that allowed them to feel important, impressive, worthy of love. But now, when you no longer look at them with trembling eyes or desperate longing, they suddenly see themselves instead a void, a self built on illusion, a soul with no core. When you go quiet, they don't see someone who is leaving. They see someone who has awakened. And nothing makes a narcissist more furious, panicked, and out of control than a source of supply that is waking up. This is when they begin to spiral into real chaos. No more perfectly scripted performances or subtle pulls. They shift into their most primal state, the panic of someone losing power. They will call you, they will text you, they will try to trigger your emotions with anything they can. Longing, anger, blame, seduction, demands, even threats. But as you remain silent, they run into a truth they cannot accept. You no longer revolve around them. You are no longer the condition for their sense of existence. And this is when their greatest fear explodes, the fear of being left alone with who they really are. In that silence, you see more clearly than ever before. You used to think you were afraid of losing them, but in reality, they are the ones terrified of losing you. Not because they love you, but because they need you to uphold their illusion of themselves. They need a place to dump blame, a place to drain energy, a place to project an image of perfection. When you are silent, that mirror shatters. There is no longer anyone to reflect the beautiful, fake image they built. And what stands before them is a truth they cannot bear. An empty ego, buried wounds, and insecurities they've always tried to hide under arrogance. And you? In this stage, you feel both light and heavy. Light, because you finally no longer live in a state of constant reaction to someone who is always changing. Heavy, because sometimes you feel guilty, sometimes you wonder if you're being too cold, sometimes you still remember the moments that once softened your heart. But those feelings no longer pull you back. They just pass through, like waves touching the shore and receding. You are no longer swept away by emotion. You stand and observe it. That is the kind of maturity you never had before. Silence also confronts you with your final fear, the fear that if you leave, no one will ever love you the way they once made you believe they did. But when you truly sit in that silence long enough, you realize something that makes you cry and frees you at the same time. They never loved you. They only loved your reactions. They only loved the way you made them feel powerful. They only loved your capacity to endure them. When silence shuts down all those reactions, what remains between the two of you is a bare, unfiltered truth. You loved them, but they did not love you. And seeing that no matter how much it hurts is the moment you escape, not through force, not through argument, but through truth. And that truth allows your heart to begin pulling itself back from the place that kept wounding it. You become clear. You no longer see them as destiny, you see them as a lesson. And once someone has been seen in truth, they never hold the same power again. Your silence makes the narcissist's world collapse because it cuts off their supply, exposes the emptiness inside them, destroys the illusion of control, and forces them to face the worthlessness they once made you carry for them. And you, in that silence, for the first time begin to feel something you had long forgotten: peace. And when peace starts to feel more familiar than chaos, your heart knows it is finally going home. Part 6. The breakaway. When you truly leave the loop and why the narcissist can never accept it. The moment you truly leave a narcissist does not happen when you pack your things, block their number, or cut contact. It happens long before that, when a simple yet irreversible realization appears in your heart. I am no longer here. It is when your body no longer reacts to them the old way, when your heart no longer jumps at the faint hope they might change, when your mind no longer gets pulled into promises you know are empty. You leave not with your feet, but with your consciousness. You no longer belong to this story. And when departure begins from within, every outward action is just your body slowly following what your soul has already decided. What makes this departure so special is that you don't leave from anger, nor purely from pain, but from a fatigue that has reached a very deep layer within you, the layer Jung called the level of the self, where the ancient wisdom of the soul resides. It is this level that has seen straight through the illusion, through the apologies, through the returns, through every loop of promising, doing, breaking, apologizing, loving again, then breaking it all over. You do not leave to punish them. You leave because staying would mean betraying yourself. And this is the phase where many who have loved narcissists say they feel as though they naturally detached, like some invisible cord snapped, and even they don't know how long it had been holding them. In the moment you step out of the loop, your mind returns to a clarity you once thought you could never regain. The questions that used to burn in your head. Why did they do that? What did I do wrong? Did they ever really love me? Suddenly become meaningless. Not because you finally have all the answers, but because you no longer need them. You see that their motives, reasons, or inner workings are no longer important. The only thing that matters is that you no longer want to live in a reality that makes you wither. But for the narcissist, the moment you leave is their worst nightmare. They cannot understand, cannot accept, cannot believe that you left without drama, without tears, without a final fight. Their heart doesn't break from losing love, it breaks from losing power. Their inflated ego cannot bear the idea that someone they have been defining for so long can simply walk away freely without asking, without warning, without leaving the door open for them to return. What terrifies them is not your disappearance, but your lack of reaction. No reaction means you have moved beyond their control. And what they hate most is loss of control. In their eyes, you are not a partner. You are an extension of the self-image they constructed. So when you step out of the loop, They feel as though a part of their body has been cut off, not because they love you, but because they don't know how to live without someone to reflect their existence back to them. The narcissist has no solid inner self. They exist through the emotional reactions of others. You were once the mirror, reflecting the perfection they wanted to believe in. When that mirror breaks, when you leave, they are forced to face their true image, empty, wounded, insecure, fragile. They cannot tolerate that. And because they cannot, they will try to pull you back by any means. Hoovering, promises, apologies, begging, anger, blame, playing the victim, even staging crises so you feel guilty. But what they don't understand is you are no longer there to listen. The strangest part of this phase is that you don't feel victorious. You don't feel triumphant. You don't feel like you've gotten even. You just feel peaceful. A new kind of peace, strange, delicate, but so deep that you want to protect it at all costs. This peace does not come from them leaving you. It comes from you leaving the version of yourself who accepted pain as proof of worth. When you step out of the loop, you are really stepping away from your past self, the one who mistook chaos for connection, who strained to be loved, who knelt before suffering as if it were their fate. This departure is the beginning of a rebirth. You suddenly realize you no longer want to rescue anyone, no longer want to heal anyone at the price of your own decay. Your heart begins to understand that love is not endurance, not silence, not sacrificing yourself to keep someone else from leaving. Real love does not require you to erase your own essence. And that realization is what makes the last cord tying you to the narcissist fall away without you having to force it. A narcissist will never accept the truth that you left because you woke up. They will always tell themselves you left because you were weak, because of someone else, because you changed, because you are selfish. Because if they had to face the reality that you left because you were too strong to stay, it would shatter the fragile ego they are clinging to. But you no longer need them to accept that. Because the real power of leaving does not lie in whether they understand it, lies in the fact that you no longer need them to. The moment you step out of the loop is the moment you look back and realize that all along you had wandered away from yourself to chase a soul that had never grown up. And the most beautiful part is this. When you leave, you are not just leaving them, you are leaving the version of yourself who believed love had to come with suffering. That is the first moment your soul finally begins its journey back home. When you look back at your entire journey with the narcissist, you begin to see a truth you were not clear-minded enough to see before. The only kind of person who can survive beside them is not the strongest, not the smartest, and not the one who loves the most, but the one who learned to survive chaos very early in life, the one who learned to read the weather of a storm before it arrived, the one who learned to shrink themselves to keep the peace, the one who learned to endure instead of run. But that truth itself becomes the most powerful invitation to awaken, because the encounter with a narcissist was never meant for you to merely survive. It was meant to show you what within you needs to be liberated. And when you finally look at the relationship, no longer through the eyes of fear, but through the light of understanding, you see that the most dangerous part was never how they treated you. It was how you had grown accustomed to treating yourself. Awakening means breaking the very loop that led you to them. Awakening means seeing that you deserve a kind of love that does not require you to suffer just to exist. Awakening means reclaiming the part of your soul you dropped along the years you spent trying to be good enough for people who never knew how to love. And when this truth rises, you do not simply walk away from the narcissist. You walk away from the version of yourself that was shaped by old wounds. You are no longer the survivor. You become the one who chooses your destiny. And that is why the narcissist never understands why they cannot keep you. Because they never imagined that awakening could be the one power they could not control. This is the moment you step into the center of yourself, not pulled into chaos anymore, not running after insecurity, not repeating the old story, but beginning a new chapter with the clarity you paid a very high price to earn. And if you are hearing this now, remember one final truth. You were not born to survive love. You were born to be loved in a way that does not wound your soul. Keep walking forward, because what lies ahead is not repetition, it is the freedom your heart has been waiting for your entire life.